On September 2nd, 2019, the United States Coast Guard was responding to a dive boat disaster near Santa Barbara, California. A few questions into the live interview with the Coast Guard commander, the anchor asked, "So, I just want to be clear, those 34 are entirely unaccounted for still?" And the commander responded, "Right now, yes. We are still actively searching, and the Coast Guard has multiple assets on scene. It was very dark when the explosion happened, and we don't know if someone was able to get off board with a flotation device prior to us arriving on scene." The anchor asked another question before coming back. "Did you use the word explosion? Was this an explosion?" In that moment, the commander realized what they said, and it was too late to pull the sentence back. Their heart sank. They realized they had just helped spread a rumor. And in follow-up, responding, "I don't know," further fed the rumors. This story is captured in the Mistakes and Misinformation chapter in the Communications Golden Hour book by Doug Levy. I'm your host, Tim Conrad. Welcome to the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications podcast with the second of 3 episodes with my guest, author Doug Levy. The U.S. has just shifted back to Trump, who communicates in a chaotic style, which will certainly impact how messages are created and received. What are your thoughts on how this will impact communications? And do you have any tips on how organizations can be seen through that chaos?
I think the most important thing is for communicators now more than ever before to make sure that their communications strategy is directly tied to the organization's business purposes. If you use that as your North Star and stay true to it, you're more likely to be okay. And your business plans, your corporate goals, your government agency targets, whatever organization you're in, everybody's got an operating plan for the next quarter, the next year, and so on. If everything you do is consistent with those purposes, that's going to be relatively safe. As things change from Washington or elsewhere, if you refer back to that purpose before doing a quick reaction, you're more likely to be okay. And that's also how to get through, because one of the most important things is to maintain credibility. And organizations or individuals who change their views frequently without some logical reason for it are harder to believe. That doesn't mean you should never change your mind about something, but you have to be able to show why and how what you're doing makes sense in the context of what your reason for existence is. I mean, for example, if you're an organization that promotes free speech, and all of a sudden you decide that you are going to be okay with legislation to restrict free speech because of political pressure or something else, you're going to destroy your credibility individually and as an organization. So we have to make sure that we don't do knee-jerk reactions. We've got to be strategic with our communications, whether it's on the fly or planned far ahead.
Yeah. And I think I'll add to that I don't think that you can respond to chaos with more chaos. I don't think it's a successful strategy to think that that's going to work. So you have to find a way to step out of the chaos and find a solution there.
Yeah.
So this is a tense and an unpredictable time. Citizens have very low trust in their governments and their institutions. There's conflicts between countries, which are increasing. And some governments are interfering directly in elections in democratic countries to build fear and division. This is it's a stomach-churning toxic stew right now. And what do we need to consider as we navigate our own crisis and how these external factors can impact how our audiences will receive and respond?
This is a very challenging one, and I have had the benefit of talking to quite a few people who have been, for example, campaigning in areas where there are large numbers of Arab Americans or people with relatives in other troubled places. The most important thing is to, as much as possible, understand that there are people who are grappling with a situation and feelings and emotions that we probably can't fully understand, the enormity of what is happening in certain places. Whether we agree with one side or the other is less important than acknowledging those emotions and those feelings. I think one of the reasons we saw such loud and large protests in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis was that there were many communities and many leaders at the time who were dismissing the claims that there was police brutality against unarmed African American people.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to agree with whether there are inappropriate examples of brutality against Black men to be empathetic with the people who believe that. And that's something
that's a great point.
which, for some reason, I think there's some executive training along the way that tries to take that empathy out. And that's a huge mistake. When I was doing some work as a community member with the New York City Police Department, the then chief of the department was doing really elaborate surveys to understand people's attitudes and a lot of other things. I mean, it was part of the crime fighting effort. One of the things that came out from those surveys was that within certain places and certain demographic groups, no matter how good the police actually were or how low the crime was, the people did not trust the police. And I remember the chief telling the officers, I know you're doing good work every day. I know that you go out and are taking care of the community. However, you need to understand that not everybody in the community sees that or believes that. So you can't just presume they all think you're heroes, even though I think you are. Understanding that lack of trust is step one to building that trust back up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so globally, and especially in the United States, we're in the midst of large societal shifts, which are likely to become even more massive in the coming years. What should we know as we head into this period, which is loaded with conflicts, wealth disparity, culture battles, and so much more?
That's a loaded question. There are so many layers to it. I think for communicators, what is really important to understand is the seismic shift in the media. We've talked for years about how the advent of social media has completely changed the roles of newspapers and the evening news. We're in a new iteration of the information age. And
we sure are.
I saw some data earlier today that quite frankly surprised me, that the median age of viewers of the major U.S. news channels on cable TV is really old, 60s and 70s. I did not realize that myself. Younger people are not watching the news. It doesn't mean they're not getting the news, but they're not watching the programs that we thought were the way to get information out to people. And unfortunately, the way people are getting their information is through their social media feeds, which by definition are tuned to give people things that are inflammatory and shocking and probably not real. So as communicators, we've got to figure out how to break through that. We've got to be more creative. We've got to be smarter. We've got to be better at listening.
Did you know that monarch butterflies can fly up to 160 kilometers or 100 miles in only one day? How do you measure if someone has experience in their field, kind of like a butterfly? Have they sent evacuations by road, boat, flight, canoe, and trail? Well, I didn't send the one by canoe, but I worked with the person who did. Do they need a team with experience with hurricanes, murders, sports, landslides, airlines, financial crisis, pandemics, wildfires, fisheries, floods, destination marketing, ice jams, dental, healthcare, or industrial incidents? We've got all those covered among our associate team, and most of them many times over. We can help you with public relations, public engagement, or marketing you may need, including training. We work with many organizations, including First Nations, governments, nonprofits, and business. We excel at the toughest work, which has drawn us to disasters, emergencies, crises, and issues. Yet we love to work on happier projects. So if you've got some of those, we're in on them too. We've organized large multi-day events, led community outreach and public education programs, facilitated public participation in dignitary sessions. You name it, we've kind of done it. Learn more about us at butterflyeffectcommunications.ca, where you can join our newsletter list. Now, fly back to the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications podcast. And it's interesting that people have, just my observation, they've left traditional media to go over to social because they found it very, very inflammatory and very, they're building up and trying to create, their own form of chaos on television and wherever else they're broadcasting and putting news out. And they've shifted over to social media, which is actually, they think is an improvement, but it's actually, you're just getting smaller bits of more chaos. And it's super fascinating. And that's something I found last year when I look back on things that we experienced during the wildfires. That was our experience that we had. It was like, wow, they don't like this chaos, but this chaos over here is worse, way crazier. And they're going to that. They're leaning into that, which is really quite interesting. But it came in different, both a different format, but a different length of format as well. So, but it's very much shifting. And I want to add another piece too. I have two older teenagers in my house, and I honestly don't know, even though I watch the news all the time, that they have ever sat and watched a broadcast from beginning to end. That's unusual to me because I can remember doing that many times as a kid, because that's what you did. At 6 p.m., the news was on, you watched, that's all you could watch. So it's definitely shifted because we have devices in our pockets that can distract us in many ways. So
it's also, unfortunately, at least in the U.S., it's a function of news literacy or the absence of news literacy. Mm-hmm. When I was in high school, we had to pass a class on government. In English class, we had to read the newspaper sometimes and write essays based on things happening in the news. I don't know if those classes are still taught, but I know that some substantial portion of the American population is functionally unable to distinguish between the New York Times and some random blogger who may be making stuff up. We've even had members of Congress take stories from the parody site, The Onion, thinking they were real. And it would be funny if it wasn't true. Unless we fix that, we're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah.
We are in deep trouble because that has become such a problem. Facts, absolutely. It's not an exaggeration to say facts literally don't matter anymore.
No, they don't. No, it's very true. My recent experiences show me that the facts will be used as a weapon, as much as they will be as something that's good. When I started this podcast, this is one part which surprised me. An audience from so many cities, towns, and villages all around this beautiful marble we call home. Hello to our listeners in Honduras, and to listeners in these communities: Grenoble, France; Farmington, Pennsylvania; Revelstoke, British Columbia, just down the highway; Barnet, England; and Bangkok, Thailand. Thank you for listening to our podcast. You join a global audience with listeners in over 30 countries and 300 cities. Wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify, iTunes, or Amazon Music, please subscribe, leave us a review, we really appreciate it. And of course, share with a friend by sending them communicationspodcast.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. The Israeli-Palestine war created further division, protests and attacks around the world. We are starting to see similar battles forming around the wider conflict in the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine war, and conflicts on other continents. What advice would you give to those communicating in organizations which may experience these conflicts coming to their communities or organizations, which is happening quite a bit these days?
Well, we certainly saw across college campuses a lot of different approaches, and sadly, quite a few examples where at least from afar, it looked as if the responses were not consistent with the organization's values. And I keep coming back to that values and purpose thing, because that really is important. If you have a mission statement that just, collects dust on the wall of every lobby, that's not going to help you. But if you have a very clear mission statement that is integrated into the way you do business, no matter what kind of organization you are, you're more likely to make good decisions. And if you're an organization that advocates for free speech, well, you need to be advocating for free speech regardless of what the free speech may be. Now, with that said, it's also appropriate to have some restrictions on workplace activity. And for example, if you're a law enforcement agency, you probably can't tell your employees that they can't carry a flag supporting a particular cause when they're off duty and away from work. But if they have a very partisan flag attached to their vehicle that is parked at the police station, that's a problem, because somebody coming to the station to do business may feel as if that's a message of hostility towards them. So you're not infringing on the person's free speech. You're actually promoting free speech by making sure that your space is neutral. And that's very important. I had to work with some of my clients recently on how to navigate potential partisanship and discord and discussion at the workplace leading up to the U.S. election. One of the things that the organization put together was a very good set of messages that said, as an organization, we wholeheartedly support civic engagement. It's our duty, it's our responsibility, it's our opportunity. We know that we are all capable of having kind, open discussions with each other. However, please keep those discussions outside of the workplace, because you don't know who else is around, and it's just not consistent with the work that we do. We encourage you to do it, but there's a time and a place. And that kind of instruction is helpful. With regard to the specifics of Gaza and Ukraine, we've seen many organizations do fundraising, and that's tricky because, I think the reality is there was less debate over Ukraine. Everybody that I know and every organization that I saw was horrified at what happened. So there was a lot of fundraising in support of people from Ukraine. With Israel and Gaza, it's unfortunately way more complicated and horribly tragic on so many levels. Understanding that it's not a clear one side right, one side wrong situation. It's much riskier to take a side. So generally, if you are going to do anything, you should do something that is balanced. So if you're going to give people information on how to support refugees from Gaza, you might want to come up with ways to support people in other places that can help, or work with a relief organization that is neutral and works across borders, like the World Central Kitchen. People want to do something when something bad is happening elsewhere. And to the extent that you can help channel that energy in a productive way, you might even bring people together, which is kind of a cool thing.
Several courses are being developed, and I'm happy to let you know that the first course will be on CanadianTraining.ca really soon. Job interviews, public speaking, messaging, and speaking to media. How to speak more confidently to groups of people in many settings will be our first course. It will teach you skills useful for many settings which require you to speak, where your nerves may be winning the battle right now. Launching soon. Sign up for updates and early access at www.canadiantraining.ca to learn how to speak more confidently to groups of people. Subscribers will also get free checklists, guides, and more. CanadianTraining.ca. Learn from our mistakes. Someone should. We know much of the population wants to know what organizations think of these conflicts as a way to demonstrate leadership. for those organizations. So what do organizations who have this expectation say when there is such division?
One of the things that is really important is a recognition that it may appear that everybody agrees with one side, or that one side is morally or ethically right and the other side is wrong. I don't know very many. I'm not sure I know any situations that are truly light and dark that way. As a result, I think it's really important that we modify the way we think about conflicts and recognize that as an organization, our values may align with a certain position. However, we need to, in most situations, make sure that we keep room for other points of view. I think when we saw the protests across many of the university campuses, one of the problems was that there was deep concern for the people who were killed on October 7th. And the reaction when the Israeli army attacked Gaza and killed many people there was not the same. There's obviously a lot to the differences in the actions. However, a death is a death. Grieving when people die is appropriate. It is a human reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you are even if you are steadfast on one side or the other, acknowledging grief across the board is very important. For example, when I've written messages for organizations in situations like, we're always very careful to acknowledge the emotions, the feelings, the suffering everywhere, and help our audiences understand what we are doing about it if there is something that we as an organization can or should do, or if it's really beyond our scope, direct people where they can turn to get emotional support if they need it, to give to charity or participate in activities in support of one side or the other, or optimally organizations that are neutral and serving across borders.
Mm-hmm.
That's always helpful. Unless you're an arm of one of the participants in the conflict overseas, I mean, such as a representative of one of the governments, having some degree of neutrality or at least empathy towards both sides is critically important. And again, going back to the universities, there's nothing wrong. I mean, I think it was a natural reaction to be horrified by what happened on October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us were equally horrified, or more, by what happened next. And you can't say all anti-Semitism is wrong while allowing people to be campaigning against all Arabs, especially if you're an academic institution, because neither is technically correct. Campaigning against the slaughter of innocent people in Israel by Hamas is not the same as campaigning against all Arab Americans or any Arab Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Arab Americans are not Hamas. The Israeli government is not American Jews.
Yeah.
And of course, what makes things really complicated is that not every American Jew supports the Israeli government. Many of us have very strong feelings otherwise. But making space for the multiple sides is an art that leaders must do.
Mm-hmm.
And the definition of a leader is to help people see more than just what's in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the truth, eh? And we're, we're upon Remembrance Day here in Canada, and it does take me back to, the stories of the war, both wars. I was fortunate enough and I know you are, that we were alive to hear firsthand stories from World War I and World War II veterans, and I was always surprised by the humanity that would sometimes appear in the middle of war amongst soldiers who would, celebrate holidays together, and go to help one another to collect their dead and injured. We've lost some of that humanity over these last, 80, 100 years. And I do hope we'll see some of that come back. So I like that your approach is, we can be empathetic towards the loss of life and focus on that. And that's a good starting point.
And honestly, that's an important starting point for communication in any bad situation. How many times have we seen a police chief stand up and talk about the bad guys? We shot the bad guy or whatever. Well, it doesn't matter what the person did. That was somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something to celebrate. And there's nothing wrong with expressing sympathy to the people who have lost a loved one.
Yeah.
No matter what the circumstances are.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've certainly seen that here in North America. It's a challenge that police are seeing when they're responding to some calls and they're dealing with a mental health crisis with someone, and then that person ends up dead at their hands. And I think if I could send a little message out to the police out there, it's like I don't feel like there's enough empathy coming in those moments for that situation towards the people that have lost their lives and the families and friends of those people that were the victim in this situation. They're also part of potentially causing a crime. Yes. Maybe, but it's. I think we can certainly give more empathy. There's nothing wrong with that. Thank you for listening and taking the time to learn from our guests. Join us for one more episode with Doug Levy. Do you have suggestions for guest or topic, or maybe some thoughts on one of our episodes? You can write to us at communicationspodcast.com, where you can also leave a review. Thanks to Ed McDonough for a 5-star review on Season 2, Episode 11, Crisis Communications Management with Shauna Bruce. Now, I don't want Ed to be alone. We need more than one review. That's all we've got. Ed, you were the first. Let's get some more and get that trend going. Wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify, iTunes, or Amazon Music, please subscribe and share with a colleague or friend, such as someone in health communications. Remember, we also have a newsletter that will give you more information, and we put up transcripts, links, and information from our guests on our website. Visit communicationspodcast.com. If you like this episode, check out Season 1, Episode 7, Connecting in the Chaos, with guest host Jan Enns and me as the guest. Thank you for joining the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications podcast, a production of Butterfly Effect Communications. We are masters of doom and gloom communications, bringing calm to chaos. Goodbye. Hear me later.